We've got a little lapel mic to try out today. Let's see how this goes. I'm going to say right off the bat that this whole episode is basically just a very long dream of Ruby's that was created because the Doctor put his foot in it again. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there wasn't even a title sequence. They just slapped the title and the cast credits in with the opening fade. Either they're coming to realize that people are skipping the title sequence now that they're streaming across the planet, or they're appealing to eagle-eyed viewers, such as myself, and essentially telling us to strap in. This episode removes the Doctor for nearly the entire episode, largely because Ncuti Gatwa was filming the final season of Sex Education at that time. We also have Ruby being haunted by an old woman positioned exactly 73 yards away from her at all times. For those that don't live in the Dark Ages, that's about 67 meters. Whenever she sends people to go and speak to the mysterious woman, they get scared and run away. What exactly she says to them is left a mystery, which only added to the unsettling nature of this episode. Time goes on and Ruby remains haunted and abandoned. I'm going to go into more detail about what happens and what I thought about it all over the next 10 minutes or so. Hopefully together, you and I can get to the bottom of what I'm calling the Years and Years episode of Doctor Who. Script versions of these reviews are available for all patrons to read and comment on the moment they go into their first draft. Patrons also get access to the Simp stage over on my Discord server, where we discussed the latest Doctor Who episodes every Sunday at 11 AM BST. One of the location scouts this show hired needs a promotion. This place was a hell of a find. I mean, look at that tree! The fact we don't see this woman's face throughout the episode was a good demonstration of restraint. This was maintained by the continual distance of 73 yards between actress and camera. That must have been a meticulous task. Such a simple idea makes this alternative reality that Ruby finds herself in to be quite creepy. I did begin to wonder who exactly put this little web of mysticism here, but then I thought, does it really matter? I'd be happy for there to be an answer to this quandary, but equally, I wouldn't mind if this episode was just left to be its own thing. Whilst wandering around the coastline without the Doctor, Ruby bumps into the Susan Twist cameo of this episode.
I haven't met you before, have I?
Well, I don't think so. Have you?
No, that was a different...
Oh, it's looking like my wish is coming true. This acknowledgement in the story of Ruby's familiarity with this character's face makes me hopeful that she will be a character with function later in the series. Ruby then winds up in a pub with some rather inhospitable characters. Them toying with her about mobile payments was rather hilarious, poking fun at the city dweller who is used to not carrying cash around. Even the idea of a Coke costing £5, like, I guess it's a small price to pay for being in relative safety with other people. At first I thought she just had more money than sense, but then suddenly they were all in on the joke to mock her for being afraid. It's one nightmare to be followed around the Welsh coastline at night, but another to make a down payment of £70 and be mocked and called racist by a crowd of strangers. These Peter Jackson-inspired close-ups on the characters did a great job of exemplifying their otherworldliness too. I think I would have just walked out if I was Ruby, but no, she stays the night, riding the tide of this dream she has absolutely no control over. Then she goes back to London, where her mum has this hilarious explanation for where the Doctor went.
That's what men do. They go into their sheds and they potter. They have train sets and hobbies and things women should never know about.
The pair came up with this little plan to treat their smartphones like walkie-talkies.
Everyone she talks to, they just run away.
Yes, but Welsh people.
That's racist.
But this backfires and Ruby gets kicked out of her own home. I honestly thought it was really funny seeing Carla in the backseat of this cab. Even Doctor Who poop were inspired enough to turn this moment into a hip-hop track. Obviously this wasn't the intention, but it's such a bizarre scenario of a future Ruby scaring people off that I think I just laughed from having no real idea of how to react to all this. Alternative meanie mum Carla made a return here too, casting such vitriol towards her own adopted daughter, which was very saddening to watch. I thought this was the first time the snowy moment in this episode didn't feel entirely forced. The shot comes right after some very hurtful words,
I'm your daughter.
Well, except you're not, are you? Even your real mother didn't want you.
and I think it would naturally remind an orphan of their lack of a place in the world. Looking up in search of hope and only finding snow paints a really emotional picture. I love this moment. I really appreciated the sight of a cold, dark hallway seamlessly transitioning from one set to another as well, contrasted by the warm colors of the interior. I think I would have liked to have seen more emotion from Millie Gibson as her character's life crumbled around her. But again, it's a dream. Does anybody react in their dreams as they would in real life? The sequence with Kate Stewart showing up sadly seemed a bit too outside of the realm of possibility for being in a dream of Ruby's. The audience hadn't been given an adventure with Ruby being introduced to Unit. However, it's not impossible given the length of time the pair have been adventuring for. At the same time, Kate explains as though this is their first time meeting.
We're the Unified Intelligence Task Force created to investigate the extraterrestrials.
So how Ruby could generate Kate so accurately in her mind without meeting her previously doesn't make a lot of sense. Even continuity errors can occur inside this dream.
I think this timeline might be suspended along your event.
This line had me thinking that Kate had somehow gotten to her whilst in this dream state. Does Unit have access to the parallel possibilities of Ruby's timelines? This is just starting to sound like an episode of Loki. Everything accelerates into the future, with Ruby winding up being a professional single woman of 40 years old. It was a nice try, guys, but making her hair slightly longer and giving her these goofy glasses didn't convince me in the slightest. Credit where it's due, Ruby's disappointing dating sequences were really funny. Not only did she outright dump somebody for being great except in the bedroom, but also...
I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I've got to ask, is there someone else?
That focus pull on the woman in the background was just terrific. Her constant friend throughout life, preventing her from being able to date, a struggle with intimacy. It's all great. I loved that. This sequence largely revolves around Ruby taking down a future politician that the Doctor briefly mentioned before the dream began. I was firstly reminded of the Black Mirror episode Demon 79, which is about a woman called Nida who is given foresight by a demon, a power which she uses to prevent a fascist dictator uprising. Her inability to kill said director would cause the world to end in nuclear Armageddon. It's a bit more complicated than that, but you can check out my analysis of that episode right here. There were at least a few more stakes at play in that story, allowing for some tension to be built up. Here in this episode of Doctor Who, however, the dictator-to-be just simply wants nuclear Armageddon, and Ruby decides he should be scared off like she did her mother and Susan Twist. The other thing I was reminded of with this political sequence was Davies' 2019 series Years and Years, something else I've also reviewed on the channel. Emma Thompson plays that series' fascist independent politician who rises to power through populist rhetoric and anti-immigration policies. Both Davies and Brooker are very concerned about independent parties in the UK, presumably because of the historic rise to power of the Nazi Party in the Weimar Republic. With unstable economic conditions, the likelihood of political radicalization increases. Just like in Years and Years, people use their technology to oust the leader just as things begin to spiral out of control. The politician in this episode, named Roger ap William, seems to be appealing to those that feel oppressed. I was aware that the Welsh language was suppressed in schools and the legal systems right up until the 1970s, as I understand it, and even characters in the pub insist on the blood of the Welsh being spilled by the English. I really liked this assertion, as it inspired me to look further into Welsh subjugation by the English. The only problem is that this whole rhetoric seems so unlike somebody that would be voted in as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Thankfully, the dreamlike quality of this episode means that my disbelief towards this individual can be suspended. However, I'm not sure what point Davies was trying to get across. Was it about how easily people flock to claims of oppression? Or was it about the UK's unhealthy investment in nuclear weapons?
He is a politician, but he's social media savvy. He's the future of politics, I think.
Social media savvy? I didn't get that impression from this guy whatsoever. I think the overly simplistic representation of this politician can not only be attributed to the dreamlike quality of the scenario, but also reflects Ruby's own understanding of politics. I say this because we learn in this episode that Ruby is, or will be, politically motivated to stop fascists. Given how limited her characterization has been so far in this series, this episode did a world of good for her. It's a shame this couldn't have been more evident earlier on in the series, but better late than ever, I suppose. I'm just not sure her political drive is going to resonate well with audiences.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Irish Cabriola, has stepped forward to take control and has already promised what he calls a more lenient and listening government.
Woo, girl power, yeah! Finally, we see Ruby dreaming that she's very old and visiting the TARDIS, presumably then shown on her deathbed.
I could make it snow once upon a time.
That's nice.
This was where the nightmare conclusion and the twist of this episode happened. It was quite unsettling to see Ruby's future self now standing at the edge of her bed, closer than before, within arm's reach in fact, only to discover Ruby was the creepy woman all along. It took an entire lifetime in her head to tell the Doctor not to step on the fairy circle. This is fine, I just would have preferred it maybe if Ruby herself had stepped into the circle, showing an internal prevention of a causal event. I honestly didn't know that fairy circles even existed before this episode. I was disappointed to find a lack of explanation of what fairy circles are from the Doctor.
Charms and spells and hopes and dreams.
Fairy rings are supposedly the natural growth of mushrooms in a circular fashion. People believe they appear where fairies have danced or are dancing. Apparently in folklore, breaking or entering fairy circles is a big no-no. This thing in the episode looks man-made though, like a giant dream catcher. I would have liked some exploration of how somebody, i.e. the Doctor or Ruby, would have been broken out of it once trapped. I guess I'm meant to assume that Ruby broke herself out of it. Okay, but her older self doesn't look anything like the ghostly figure in the distance. Where did all this hair come from? So, did it suck? This episode is almost bulletproof from criticism, as dreams generally don't follow any form of internal logic. That didn't stop the latter half of the episode suffering from inconsistencies, with recycled concepts and a lack of purpose in its politics. Once again, I was strapped in for the awesome concept that had me hooked in for the entire episode. It's funny, it's charming, and lands a character study of Ruby fairly well. Considering this was the first episode they filmed of the series, throwing Millie Gibson in the deep end here has come with some mostly positive results.
She always gives these amazing performances, these amazing, really heartfelt performances. I've cried so many times watching episode 4. It's incredible.
Well, I didn't think she was that good. I mean, Christ. Had this episode leaned more into Ruby's isolation in the latter half, I think we could have had a really solid episode. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad episode. It just could have been better. I give 73 yards a 7 out of 10.
If you say so, Paul. I do. Woo.